Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start the proceedings now. Thank you all for waiting, and I'm sorry for the delay in beginning. This is obviously a very important story, and it concerns the relationship between the British security services and a person known, I think indeed invented by you people, or some of you people, as Jihadi John. So I'm going to call first of all on Asim Qureshi, from Cage to explain the background to this, and then we'll be hearing from Kerry Boulevant, also from Cage on this matter. After that, there will of course be time for questions. Please, when you're asking the questions, let us know your name and which media organisation you're from. Asim Qureshi.
Thank you. Bismillah. Hi there, everybody. My apologies for being a little late. We want to start this press conference really by, first of all, mentioning that when it comes to arbitrary detention, torture, unlawful killing, that it's important that we as a society condemn that. And that's really what Cage is about. We started off very much on the basis that we saw Guantanamo, we saw arbitrary detention, we saw torture, and we couldn't accept that as being a reality of the way that our societies work. And that follows through to whoever carries out those arbitrary detentions, whoever carries out that torture or those executions. It doesn't matter who they are. We have to live in a world and a society that is free of these things. So we wanted to put that out there. And we also wanted to put out there that this story in many ways is about human beings and human lives. You know, we can't forget that, because when I think about, you know, why I'm here today, I can't forget the efforts that we as Cage made to try and secure the release of Alan Henning. We can't forget people like him and others, you know, people who have been killed in the war in Iraq, who were subjected to all forms of torture and arbitrary detention. So this is where we want to start this press conference. That, yes, while we're here to talk about a very, very important subject matter, that there is an underlying kind of humanity that we shouldn't forget as we speak about these things, because often we can become too confused about what this is really about. So, you know, we do want to remember Alan. We do want to remember, you know, what happened to him and what happened to so many others as well. And we do want to remember all those other lives that have been lost. So sorry for taking so long to introduce, but we think it's important that we put that out there. Now, you know, obviously we're here to speak about somebody by the name of Mohammed Emwazi, who I've known since the summer of 2009. Mohammed, I want to tell you about him first, before anything else. You might be surprised to know that the Mohammed that I knew was extremely kind, extremely gentle, extremely soft-spoken, was the most humble young person that I knew. You know, we're going to release all the emails that we exchanged with one another. We received consent from the family to do so. And what you'll see when you read those emails is somebody who, despite going through great difficulties in his personal life, he belittled that difficulty in the sense that he would say to me, write to me things like, I know you're dealing with very, very big cases, important cases, where there's human rights catastrophes taking place. But if you've even got a small amount of time, even if you've got a little bit of time just to work on my situation, I would really appreciate it. This is the kind of person that we're talking about. Kind of person who would turn up at Cage's offices with some posh baklava, you know, just because he said, you know, like, I was thinking about you guys, you'd been doing a little bit of work for me, and I just wanted to say thank you. You know, this is the kind of person that we're talking about. So this is why when I'm asked, is the person that you see on those videos the same as the person you remember, Mohammed Emwazi, it's difficult for me to say that, yes, these two people are exactly the same. Because there's one character that I remember, one person I remember, one young, kind person that I remember, and then I see that image, and there doesn't seem to be a correlation between the two. And even, you know, maybe I think we want to clarify that the Washington Post kind of recorded my comments incorrectly, while I think that there are some striking similarities between the young man that I remember and the person we see in the video. I can't be 100% certain. He's got a hood on. Come on, guys. You know, the guy's got a hood on his head. It's very, very difficult. So my apologies. So this is just a little background about the character of this young man. So when Mohammed came to me, it was with two other friends of his, and they had been to Tanzania in 2009. They had gone there on holiday after he had finished his degree because they wanted to just basically enjoy themselves. They wanted to have a good time. They get to Tanzania and they're told once they get there that actually you're not permitted to enter. We've been told to stop you and to return you back to the UK. But where does this come from? We're talking about a time period post-2007, after Ethiopia's invaded Somalia, where there are entire communities who are being harassed by the security agencies, either because they have an interest of traveling to that region or because they hail from that region. Many of you will be familiar with the Kentish Town youth workers from Camden who were systematically harassed. They had their lives made miserable for them. They, at every single opportunity that MI5 could, they abused them, abused their rights. So actually, when Mohammed came to me with his friends, it was very easy and very quick to understand where this was coming from, because there was already an environment that was taking place. I dealt with a number of cases already. It wasn't just the Camden guys. There were many, many people who were coming to us with very similar stories. Some wanted to come out publicly, many didn't. These guys said, look, we've seen those other stories. We just wanted to register with you as an organization that logs these kinds of abuses, that this has happened to us as well. So we said, okay, fine, let's do an interview. So I sat down with them. I took their entire statement about what happened. They told me about, you know, what the kind of roughing up, I would say, that took place in Tanzania. But then they get sent back to the UK through Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, they're questioned by MI5 and the Dutch security agencies, and also, once again, when they arrive back in Dover. Now, lots of questions get asked, you know, kind of the standard Schedule 7 under the Terrorism Act, kind of questions that are constantly put to you. You know, many of you will probably never experience this, but as Muslims, you know, we've heard these stories hundreds and hundreds of times. Questions like, so, what type of Muslim are you? And what's your opinion on the Middle East? And what do you think of the Palestinian conflict? You know, all of these types of things. So these guys got the whole treatment. But what was interesting for Mohammed is that while they were alleging to him that we think you were going to be a member of Al-Shabaab, that you were out there, you were going out there to do this, he goes, for a start, there's an entire country that is between Tanzania and Somalia. Okay, it's called Kenya. You can't just go from Tanzania into Somalia. We were there for holiday. But what really struck him was the moment that the MI5 agent said to him, by the way, your fiancée in Kuwait, we've spoken to her and her family. And you can see this in the emails that we'll present. And it struck him that, well, hold on a second. You know that I have an interest in coming back to the UK, but not only coming back to the UK, but going forward and making a life for myself with somebody elsewhere. If I was going out there to join Al-Shabaab, why would I be bothering to do any of that stuff? It doesn't make any sense. So that's when he really understood for the first time himself that this wasn't about any credible information that they had or any evidence that they had received or anything. This was just a fishing expedition to first see whether or not he would crumble and give them whatever they wanted, you know, or whether or not he'd be willing to become an informant from them, because they're looking for anybody who's willing to take money in order to inform on their own community. But this is quite a man who really knows himself, and he decided that, well, actually, no, I'd rather not do that. Thank you very much. So Mohammed ends up, you know, kind of just getting on with his life, trying to make a living for himself. His family, when they see this harassment taking place, they get quite concerned and they say, well, look, we think it's better that rather than you being in the UK, you use this degree that you've got, you go and you transfer those skills to Kuwait. Okay, there's job opportunities there. You know, you're somebody with skills. I'm sure that, we're sure that they'll want somebody like you. And that's what he does. He goes there, he works for a telecommunications company. They give him a job where he's working for a number of months. And then in 2010, his father calls him back and says, look, I need your help. Please come back to the UK, give me a hand with a few things, and then you can go back to your job. So he takes a week's holiday. at the end of that week, he looks to return to Kuwait. Except when he gets to the airport in Kuwait, he's told, look, you got an Emirates flight, but unfortunately the Kuwaitis aren't going to allow you to enter into Kuwait. If you want to go to Dubai, you can, but no one's going to allow you to get on your connecting flight from Kuwait there. And he said, what's the point? There's no point in me going to Dubai and being stopped there and having to come back here anyway, so I might as well not just take my flight full stop. What then proceeds from that moment, from the summer of 2010, all the way until August 2013, is the most incredible, persistent efforts that I have ever seen from anybody to try and change their situation. You know, we've got that whole period, which is almost, what, 2.5 years of communication between himself, me, and his lawyer, talking about, okay, what can you do to alleviate the problem that you're having right now? On one occasion when he was at the airport, he was roughed up by the police a little bit. He was strangled by an officer. And you know, he was quite upset about the whole thing. So we said to him, go and make a complaint to the IPCC. So then he emails me with his entire complaint, sends me his complaint reference number. He does the things that we ask him to do. Because why? He wants to make a life for himself in Kuwait. He was obsessed with this one thing. I want to get married out there. I want to live out there. I don't want to live in this non-Muslim country that treats me like a terrorist, even though they've got no evidence against me. I'm an innocent man. I've not done anything wrong. Why am I being treated in this way? And so we're helping him. Go to your MP. Go try and, let's see if we can find a legal avenue. We even introduced him to a journalist from The Independent saying, you know, go to this guy. You know, he's covered some similar stories. I'm sure he'll be willing to cover yours as well. So many different things we were trying to suggest to him. And guess what? He complied with everything. He tried his best in order to do those things so he could change his situation from what? From within the system. The one thing that we at Cage constantly go on about, which is if you've got a problem, don't just act in a crazy way. Let's use the processes that we've been given here in order to effect change. That's what we've been talking about. And this is what we were proselytizing to this young man. Okay, that you have the ability to change your situation, but nothing was working. And this is the problem that we have here, that we have created here in the UK an environment in which the security agencies can act with impunity, can destroy the lives of young people without any recourse to being able to challenge them in an effective way. Just look at Cage's bank accounts, for example. You know, our director gets arrested. Next thing we know, our bank accounts, not just ours, many Muslim organizations are closed. And we know the way this operates, and you guys are very, very smart people, all of you, far smarter than me. You know how it operates as well. That the government turns around and says, well, this has got nothing to do with us. They're private banks. If they want to make that assessment, that's up to them. Yes, but who created the environment for them to make that assessment? Who is advising them to make those assessments? It's the very people who set policy in this country. And so we're forced to try and operate within the system while being constantly told you're not actually allowed to be a part of it. You don't have the same rights as everyone else. You have to accept being subjected to an alternative form of justice because we believe that there is a threat from you people generally. This is the message that's being sent. Whether or not it's malicious or if it's a byproduct of the way national security works, that's a different conversation. But what I'm talking to you about how people feel, about the reality on the ground. So this is Muhammad's reality. So all the way up until August 2013, and the last thing that Muhammad does, his father, this is literally within the last month before he leaves. His father says to him, my son, okay, you've tried everything. The best thing for you to try now is to change your name by deed poll. This is how desperate they got. If they had come to me and said that, I would have said, well, that's probably not going to work because they'll record the fact that you've changed your name. But these are the kinds of ideas that they were having, like change your name by deed poll and then try and go to Kuwait, see if that works. And he does. He goes to the office, he changes his name, you know, so it's now legally registered as something else, not very different, but very close to the same name. And then he tries one last time, let me see if I can go to Kuwait. And again, that final time, they stop him, The police are there, they're questioning him again, and he's just like, that's it. This is from what the family have told me. I didn't know this myself. 1 week after that, Mohammed's gone. He's a missing person. 3 days after he goes missing, the family finally go to the police and say, you know, Mohammed's gone missing, we don't know where he is, you know, please help us find him. It's 4 months after that that the police finally turn up to the family's home and say, we believe Mohammed's in Syria. We believe Mohammed's in Syria, you know. And the family say, look, as far as we've heard, he's in Turkey doing aid work. We don't know. We can't say for certain. You know, you have to give us more information than that. So this is obviously a very brief summary of a long, long period of meeting and communication. But the key factor in all of this is that this is not somebody who sat there and ever said, you know, whoever said that I hate the system, I reject the system, you know, this is a system of non-Muslim laws, why should I engage with it, I want out of here. It was somebody who said, I don't like the environment here, but I'm willing to engage with the system in order to affect change in my own personal life. So that, for me, and for us at Cage, is the story of this young man. Now what happens after that to him, I can't tell you, I don't know myself, okay? You know, obviously, I wish that, you know, things could have turned out differently for him and for many other people, and it causes me a great deal of sadness. You know, because the way this whole thing came about in the first place is that the journalist from the Washington Post, she contacted Cage and she said, look, I'd like to have a meeting with you. This is like last Friday. Next day she came and she said, I've got a name, a guy named Mohammed Emwazi. I've known this journalist for a number of years. I said, okay, like, you know, as a favor, I'm willing to let you know if we have something on our files. I said, yeah, I remember this case. Yeah, he's a young man that I knew, very nice young man, whatever else. Is everything okay? Is he all right? You know, is there anything that I need to know about? And she said, look, you know, I'm just interested. It was on the Sunday, last Sunday, that she finally said, look, I need to show you a video, okay? I would like to know whether or not you think that the Mohammed Emwazi that you knew is the same as this person. So she shows me the video. I said, look, now that you've said it, there's something there that I think is strikingly similar, but how can I say for certain? It's impossible for me to say certainly that these two are the same people, you know? So, you know, the Washington Post unfortunately did misquote or didn't give a full accounting of exactly what my position was on this matter. You know, and this is, sorry, it's quite hard because, you know, he's such a, I'm really sorry. I didn't expect, he was such a beautiful young man, really. You know, it's hard to imagine the trajectory, but it's not a trajectory that's unfamiliar with us, for us. We've seen Michael Adebolajo, once again somebody that I met, you know, who came to me for help, looking to change the situation within the system. When are we going to finally learn that when we treat people as if they're outsiders, they will inevitably feel like outsiders and they will look for belonging elsewhere? Our entire national security strategy for the last 13 years has only increased alienation, has only increased people feeling like they don't belong. Why? Because a narrative of injustice has taken root. A narrative of impunity, that there is no accountability for the way in which our security agencies operate. That narrative has taken root within our communities. And unless we arrest that narrative, we're just going to keep on seeing these things happen over and over again, because people will feel as if they're pushed out. They will feel as if they don't have a place to belong. And when somebody's giving them a message, come, we will give you a sense of belonging, then how can we argue against that? So thank you for taking the time to come and listen. Sorry, John's going to...
Kerry Bulliman is going to speak for a few minutes now, and then we'll take the questions then.
I'm not going to be speaking directly about the case, but rather about my own experiences of harassment in a very similar sort of scenario. I was held under a control order for 2 years, as quite a few people here know. A couple of people were there when I was found innocent.
So in 2006, I was planning to go travelling to Syria, obviously long before any of the war and the fighting that was going on there. I was stopped, much as we heard in the previous case, travelling at Heathrow. I was Schedule 7'd. I was asked, how many times a day do I pray? Why did I convert? What mosques do I pray at? All of these questions that have become so ubiquitous as to identifying you as a terrorist if you happen to have a beard. After that, I was accused of being a threat to national security. I was put on a control order, but I wasn't told what the accusation was against me, and I wasn't given any evidence. The next 2 years of my life were, without even knowing why, I was being harassed on an almost daily basis, between having to live under the conditions and obligations of the control order that forced me to have to sign on a specific location, from having my house searched on regular occasions, from not being able to have a passport, from not being able to attend university or build any sort of relationships. They literally stifled every single possible aspect of my life. That on a day-to-day basis wears you down. It breaks you down, it crumbles you. We all know that the very famous saying, justice must not just be done, it must be seen to be done. And the problem with control orders and the problem with this situation where the security services can harass you day in and day out without giving you any basis is that you see no way of clearing your name. There's no court to go to, there's no jury, there's no evidence that you can disprove. There's only a vague accusation that took place in a smoky room in Whitehall, although maybe not smoky anymore, they've banned smoking. And these whispers in the halls of government are what you're trying, or in the halls of secret services are what you're trying to combat. My solicitor described it to me as trying to play darts in the dark after you've been spun around and blindfolded. You're throwing darts, but you don't know if anything's ever going to hit. After a year and a half of feeling completely crushed by something that's more at home in a country like Burma, house arrest without evidence and without being able to see any way of actually defending yourself. After a year and a half of that, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. And I went on the run. I'm sorry if this is boring for some of you, you've covered it all before. But it's relevant to this because I'm an ordinary guy. I was found innocent in the end. I was born in this country. I've lived my whole life here. Not some sort of crazy, maniacal person, and I'm known to a lot of the people here. I still felt the need that I had to get away because of the crushing nature of it, because of the oppression that I felt myself living under day in, day out, with no way of clearing my name. And that left me with no other option. I couldn't see a court system that would give me justice. I couldn't see, to be honest, a media that would cover this story fairly, especially back in 2006, the situation then. I only saw one option, and that was absconsion. And when that came up, I left. Now, after 5 weeks, I came to the decision myself that whatever it took, I had to fight it through the courts, and I had to come back. And I didn't have the patience to stick with it for 2.5 years. I lasted 1.5 years before I cracked and ran. But the two people that I absconded with, they didn't want to do that. They did leave the country, and one of them now has passed away in a drone strike. And I think to myself, there but for the grace of God. It was a split-second decision in a moment under incredible stress where the decision was made that I chose to come back and they chose not to. And that was the divergent path. It wasn't some sort of conveyor belt of radicalization. This theory that we keep on spouting that foreign policy and that domestic policy has nothing to do with radicalization and extremism, it doesn't hold up. It's been disproven academically. There's no empirical evidence for it. Academics such as Professor Arun Kurandi, Dr. Rizwan Sabir, Dr. Doug Weeks from St Andrews University have all said that there's no evidence for this conveyor belt theory. What we see time and again is that people who don't feel they're given any avenue in this society go and do extraordinary lengths, and sometimes the results of that can be horrific. I think it's also worth mentioning at this point that every single attack that's happened in the UK, and including the case that we're talking about today, was already known to the security services before the incident happened. We know that Ada Bellagio had many, many dealings with the security services, that this harassment was a regular part of his life. And it's interesting that the government's looking to bring in, or has brought in, the CTS Act, which in effect forces all civil servants and public sector workers to spy on Muslims, whether it's a nursery school teacher teaching my baby daughter, or a doctor who's going to be looking after my pregnant wife. They're all being asked to spy on every single Muslim. And yet there is no evidence that that is the approach you need to be taking. Every single time the security services have already known about these people. It's... Okay, so I'll be just 2 seconds. It's so hard to articulate in concise sentences what it is to be accused of a heinous crime and to know you're innocent, and to live every single day knowing that there's almost no way that you can prove that you're innocent. That chips away at you, and you can only maintain it for so long before something's going to give one way or another. I would like to reiterate what Asim said about our thoughts going out to people like Alan Henning as well. They've suffered immeasurably, and we were working on that case to get him returned, because all detention without due process, all killings without due process are wrong. And we must get back to universal rights. But universal rights are only universal if they apply to everybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your skin. We have to stop pushing a domestic policy that targets only Muslims, and a foreign policy that will be constantly driving people to this sort of conclusion. Sorry for taking too long of your time.
Okay, Gary, now we'll take questions now. I mean, you'll understand that this is a complex and lengthy process that has been described in very short order here. We're constantly asked, how is it, as we are with the 3 young women from Bethnal Green now, how is it that bright young people come and do this? This was a computing graduate from this country, a young man, and we have probably unparalleled access, because of the contact with Cade, to understand that process. So I'd like the questions to bear that in mind. Yep.
Thank you. Hi, Hind Hassan from Sky News. A lot of people find it really difficult to picture this man that you are telling us about. You describe him as gentle, as kind, as humble, as beautiful, and it's completely at odds with the character that we are seeing on these propaganda videos, which is a horrific, barbaric individual. And you spoke a lot about that gentleman, and yet there's a gap there as what made him go from where he is there to what we believe is him now as the so-called Jihadi John, and reiterating that we don't know it's definitely him. Yeah. Are you saying that his harassment at the hands of MI5, his marginalisation because he's a Muslim man, and the way that he was treated, which was unfounded, did that play a role in his radicalisation?
I think almost definitely. I mean, it's difficult for us to empirically show you how, but what we're saying is that when you create an environment here in the UK where he had no ability to be able to feel like he actually belonged, or even, if not in the UK, even, let's say, go to Kuwait, to get married, to continue the job that he'd been working for 8 months and was doing very, very well in. Let's imagine a scenario where he'd been allowed to go and do that. Would he have ended up where he is? I can't say for certain that that's the case. But I would be willing to probably place a sound bet on the fact that more than likely he wouldn't, you know, because from the person that I remember, you know, this is something that is extraordinary. It's absolute, you know, even the family, you know, having spoken to them, when I first asked them whether or not, you know, they felt that this is the same person, they said, how can it be? They went into absolute shock. How can it possibly be that these two people are the same person? So, of course, there are many questions about what happened next after he left. But in terms of him feeling that, you know, he doesn't belong as part of UK society, I think that our security agencies played the most crucial role in helping to feel that way.
Asim, Dominic Ashiani, BBC News, you talk about accountability. Who should be held accountable for the deaths of Alan Henning, David Haynes, Stephen Soploff, Abdul Rahman Kasik, James Foley, and Kenji Goto? Who should be held accountable for those deaths?
Of course, look, you know, we need to kind of separate a couple of issues here, and we've spoken about this, you know, in every single scenario. When we talk about Guantanamo Bay and we talk about torture and accountability, we say that everyone from the torturer all the way up to Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney should all be held accountable, right? We can't, as human beings, unless somebody is, you know, not corpus mentis, every single person has agency in what they do. So if somebody's committing war crimes, of course they must be held accountable for any crimes that they may or may not commit. That goes for everybody.
So you want Mohammed Emwazi to return to the UK to face justice, or some other court somewhere else? What are you proposing here?
What I'm saying, okay, is that there are many different layers of accountability. I would very much like to see, though, that there is a proper accountability process for the way in which our security agencies have played a role in this young man's life that has led him to feel like he can't be in the UK any longer. We have to get real about these things now, because if we keep on doing what groups like the ISC do, which is to basically whitewash the role that the security agencies play every single time that they're involved in rendition, in torture, in arbitrary detention, then of course what's going to happen is that we're going to lose complete and utter faith in any of our institutions to really find out what all of this stuff is about. Of course, if you don't have that accountability process, then continually you're going to keep on pushing models like the conveyor belt theory that Kerry mentioned, you know, and there's never going to be any accountability. So yeah, fine, we can say an individual is accountable, but if you separate his action and place it within a vacuum outside of everything else that went before it, then quite frankly, I think we're fooling ourselves.
Well, is he to blame for the deaths of those hostages?
I don't know. I mean,
well, he's there
in terms of the video, you can only see what. All I will say is that, you know, in some way, maybe he's obviously complicit. You know, whether or not he's carried out those killings, I can't say, because I don't know how those videos have been produced. You know, there are a lot of cutaways. Okay, so I can't say for certain. And let me clarify one thing. I've only ever seen one video, so I can't really say, because I mean it's not really the kind of thing that I like watching, to be honest with you. You know, I've only ever seen one video. In that, I didn't see him clearly cut the throat. So you know, I just wanted to look at his face, and that was it.
Do you think he is personally to blame? That he holds personal responsibility for the deaths of those hostages?
Dominic, let's rephrase that question. If it's him, and if he did it, that's surely what you mean, isn't it? Is that not what you mean? The first thing,
whether or not, the first thing is whether or not Mohammed Emwazi as the individual is actually Jihadi John. And I've said plenty of times already that I'm not certain, I can't be 100% certain that he is. The second one is, and I'll make a blanket statement, anyone, anywhere who is involved in war crimes, in torture, in detention, it doesn't matter who they are, how close they are. If they were my brothers, if they're involved in that kind of thing, then they should be held accountable for it.
Okay, so perhaps we don't need to ask that question again. Anybody who has committed this kind of crime is personally responsible for it. Of course, the question is, how did they get to that point?
Catherine Miller from the New York Times. You mentioned earlier that when he was consulting with you in 2009, 2010, 2011, you told him very strongly not to do, quote, anything crazy, but to work through the system. And you said, guess what? To comply with everything. Am I hearing you say...
Sorry, did I say that I told him not to do anything crazy? Maybe that was just kind of me speaking too fast, you know. But like, you know, I was encouraging to do this.
I understand whether there was an undertone of you realizing that there was a troubled young man who was playing with the idea of going off to some battlefield? Or
No,
not at all?
not at all. Yeah,
Okay.
not at all. Yeah, sorry, I can say that.
Okay, I'll be coming back that side of the room in a moment. Yes, go on.
Hello, Larissa Brown from Daily Mail. When did Cage last have contact with Mohammed?
January 2012.
It was January 2012.
That's correct.
And also, obviously, he's in contact with his family.
Mhm.
Do they now believe that he is Jihadi John?
No, they don't. They're not sure. They can't be certain at all.
And
They-
when did Cage hear that he had gone to Syria to fight for the Islamic State?
when the journalist from the Washington Post came to us, because it was a shock for me.
Mr. Qureshi,
Yes.
Kami Enzar, Channel 4 News. Given that there appears, at least in court documents, to be some established link between Mr. Emwazi and people that were wanted in connection with matters terrorism, what exactly is it that you suggest the security services do to monitor people that might conceivably end up on a path?
It's a very straightforward answer in that. Where we have violence, we, investigate and we prosecute for violent crime. We have a perfectly reasonable criminal justice system here. And the best example I can give you for that is that far majority of far-right violence, where they find bombs, they find plans, they find explosive, they find caches of weapons. You know the legislation they charge them under? The Fire and Explosives Act. In the vast majority of cases. That tells us what? That we don't need all of the security apparatus. We don't need this whole terrorism paradigm. Where there is an act of violence taking place, through good investigation work, we can actually prosecute those crimes. We can charge people, we can prosecute them, and they can be held accountable.
But those examples you gave may hold up for somebody who's planning in the active stages of doing something in this country. But if that is not your intention, or on your part, if the thing that you may end up doing is travelling to another place where there is not material evidence, surely travel bans, and
Well, what are you talking about here? Give me examples.
Well, I'm
because
talking about you blame
Mhm.
the treatment of Emwazi by the security services for his desire to flee, and that was part of his journey to radicalisation. What alternative have the security services got?
as I just said, where they
But
think
it
that somebody's going
doesn't
to commit crime.
Planning domestic terrorism is not the same.
Are you suggesting that you have any evidence to prove that Mohammed Emwazi was about to be involved in any kind of act in the UK or abroad anywhere? What is your evidence base for that?
Well,
Because the person I met would never have hurt a single person, and that is the point. Because you
I
have
think
to
that's
provide
the
the
answer.
evidence.
I think that's
if
the
you want
answer to
do.
your question, that we don't lock up people we can't prove are guilty or anything. Question here.
Ed?
You paint a scenario in which a young man with no ill intentions is harassed repeatedly by the security service. I assume in order to get him to become an informer or some kind of
Yeah.
agent.
Mhm.
Is that the assumption here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it conceivable that this story could have a different background, and it's possible that there may be intelligence that he is a committed terrorist, there's some eavesdropping of some kind, that he intends to join Al-Shabaab or potentially some other group in East Africa, and the security service are just doing their job to try and keep on top of someone who, as far as we know, now ends up being one of the world's most notorious and violent terrorists.
Okay then, Ed, provide the evidence base for that. Everything that
But
you said is just conjecture.
We know that, for instance, phone taps cannot be adduced in court in evidence.
Okay, fine.
So, what options, coming back to Kramer's question, do they have?
Because if there's an act of terrorism that's about to take place, then you can
But we're not
prosecute.
suggesting
Look,
he was
we've got
sitting
some
on
of the
top of a ticking
widest
bomb.
terrorism
We're suggesting he
legislation.
might have been joining a group,
Ed,
perhaps part of
Ed,
a funding or facilitation
Ed,
network.
Okay,
we have
you asked one
very
question, he
wide.
answered one reply, that'd be
We
good.
have wide terrorism legislation. We have an offence, Section 58 offence of possession, which is a strict liability offence. You don't even have to prove that the person has any intent to commit an act of terrorism, but you can be put away for many years just for sheer possession. Okay? So when you have terrorism laws that are so wide, that are so vague, that are so oppressive, okay, then of course, if they had something on someone, they could do them for many, many different things. But what we have here is a system that makes an arbitrary decision about somebody, when we're talking about control orders, we're talking about TPIMs, we're talking about citizenship deprivation, passport revocation, all of these things, deportation orders, they say, well, we think this person is not conducive to the public good, or is an Islamist extremist. You know, things that have very, very vague terminology. They put them through hell for 2 years, and when that person says, well, actually, I don't think I am, let me challenge the system, they say, well, hold on a second, you can't be in the court because there's secret evidence, your counsel can't be in court because there's secret evidence, but what we'll do is we'll give you a special advocate who, by the way, you can't talk to, but they'll represent your interests. So this is what we're talking about here, that we have constructed an entire system of justice or injustice which allows for people to have their lives ruined, and they don't know what the cases are against them. But what's worse than that is that that person who's subjected to that, everybody around that individual then becomes a suspect. And that is how the security agencies work, that they create these suspect communities who then, unfortunately, are harassed, they're abused, they're put through all sorts of different things until they find that they have no space to breathe.
Okay.
Yeah. Michelle from NBC News. He spoke about the difficulties of identifying him. We have heard his voice. I'm wondering if that's helped you at all. Did his voice resonate in any way?
I mean, it's a very kind of like, you know, from northwest London, it's quite a familiar accent. He did speak a little bit like that, but once again, it's difficult because even then they've changed the sound a little bit, haven't they? So I can't say for certain.
And just one follow-up question. You said you changed his name by deed poll. Could you give us the name?
I'm not sure what it is.
Behind you? Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Qureshi, speaking of TPIMs and control orders, with your interaction with both Mr. Emwazi, his family, and his lawyer, do you know whether, can you confirm whether he was officially notified that he was under a control order?
He was never under control, as far as I'm aware.
And is there,
Go on.
was there any other travel ban to another country that you were aware of?
So the only other thing that I know about, and this was, once again, just in the months prior to him, you know, kind of leaving, was that he had enough about the situation that he was in. So he decided to change his line completely. He heard that a lot of Muslims were going to the Gulf in order to teach English. So he took a CELTA course, which is kind of teaching English as a subject to foreigners. So, you know, heard a lot about a lot of people going to Saudi Arabia. So him and 3 friends, they did the CELTA course. They had Skype interviews with different institutions in Saudi Arabia. Both his friends were accepted, even though they heard that there were plenty of positions available. He was the only one who was then rejected in the end from being able to take that position. So that was prior to him, just prior to him changing his name to whatever he changed it to. So that's just another example where there may have been something, but we can't say for certain.
Yeah.
After 2012, when you had your last contact, were you aware of further contacts that they had with anybody from your organisation?
Not with our organisation. I'm not sure. Full stop. Really.
What further contacts will you have with
Sorry, for?
What other contacts have you had since then with people associated?
I don't know. I mean, like, I can't say. After January 2012, I know nothing about him until the journalist from the Washington Post approaches me.
Okay. Over here. Yeah.
Images of Jihadi John have been circulating widely for months, and you say yourself that there are striking similarities between him and Mohammed Emwazi.
Yeah.
Yet it was only 2 days ago that you made the connection. Why did it take so long to make that connection?
Come on.
You made it earlier. Why didn't you call it connection?
That is a ridiculous question. I mean, like, you know, often you see something. I haven't actually ever seen the videos. I've only ever seen pictures of him in the media when they've been reporting on his case. I've never actually actively gone out to look at the videos myself. You know, it's often the case that unless somebody says to you, you know, oh, we think it's that person, you're never really going to make a connection because you're not even thinking in that stratosphere that there might even be somebody like that. So, I mean, you know, sorry to say it, but it's a bit of a silly question, you know, like, to ask. Could have used it on something better. Yeah.
Members of the Muslim community are under the spotlight these days, and they are asked to do more in order to combat what is called terrorism and radicalism. From what we have been hearing, it's nothing to do with the parents or the Muslim community to handle. How can you answer this?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Please, if you can read it.
Members of the community are asked to do more in order to combat terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it is up to the parents of those Muslim young people in order to actually put them off going into places like Syria or committing crimes of terrorism or whatever it is?
Of course, in our own way though. And it's also up to our scholars and our teachers. But when you create an environment where everyone is scared to talk about, you know, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Palestine, for example. The mosques are actively scared of speaking about things. When you have a program such as Prevent, which seeks to shut down those events and not allow for that airing of ideas and discussions, then what happens is that we can't teach our community. The Muslim community, the way that it operates is that we take instruction from our teachers. We ask our teachers, what do you think about this, that, or the other? If there is a climate of fear that restricts our teachers from feeling like, well, these topics are too controversial, you know, then what happens is that our youth, they then look to other sources in order to find that information. So this is actually part of the national security paradigm that we have, that instead of, you know, saying that actually we need more openness, we need more engagement, we need more discussion, like really, if we want to stop our youth from doing anything, you know, that we don't want them to do, what we need is actually weekend courses on the jurisprudence of jihad, as an example, because we need to teach them. But no mosque is going to do that, because all mosques are far too frightened to like use the J word, because they're worried about what the ramifications are going to be. Even if we're going to teach them the correct thing, the Prevent officers are going to come down on us like a ton of bricks, because they're going to think that we're teaching something dodgy. But actually, we need that instruction, because if we don't give that instruction, in our way, without it being government-sponsored, without funding money to organizations like the Quilliam Foundation to say, well, this is how Muslims should behave, and if they don't behave that way, then they're bad Muslims, and the only good Muslims on the planet are Muslims like us. You know? If you keep on pushing those kinds of narratives, then what you're going to do is you're going to limit the space of genuine debate and discussion, which is what we need right now, not less of it.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions here.
Sarah Gary, Sky News. Obviously, you knew this chap and you knew Malaysia. Do you feel that you personally could have done more to prevent them from going down this path?
You know, it's funny that you say that. That was a conversation that we've had last few days, you know. You feel a sense of guilt because, you know these people, and you feel like, I wish that something I could have known or something could have happened to stop this from taking place. Of course, like, I would like to think that most human beings, if they feel like they had a kind of a pastoral role in anybody's life, would always feel a sense of responsibility to those people. You know, I had no idea that any of those guys would go down this route. Even Adebolajo, I didn't see somebody who was crazed or manic in any way. I found somebody who was deeply troubled by what was happening to him and the difficulty he was having, and somebody who loved his brother so intensely that when he heard that MI6 were harassing his brother in Saudi Arabia, saying things like, well, the only reason you haven't been picked up and tortured is because we're protecting you, so you need to cooperate with us. Somebody, when he hears that, he thinks, these people, they're, my kid brother, they're harassing my kid brother, and feels very, very bitter and sore about that. But I didn't see somebody who's going to go around executing people in the streets of London, So obviously you feel something. But really, if I'm going to place the blame anywhere, it's not with myself, it's with the security agency.
Okay, we want to get as many people in as possible. It would be, of course, a fair question for you to ask of the security services, seeing you were in touch with both these people. Did you feel that you did enough? That would be a fair question, which I think everybody in the room would want to put to the security services as well. Behind you, there.
Associated Press. Asim, did you, talking about the family for just a minute, has the family been visited by security services in the time since the videos have come out? And what is their mood today? I mean, what's their situation?
The only thing I'm aware of is that 4 months after he left, they came and said that your son's in Syria. But I'm not aware of any other contact communication they had after that.
So there wasn't an instance in which they came to them and said, well, we suspect that your son is Jihadi John or anything like that?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of that.
Next to you.
Molly Hunter, ABC News. Have authorities come to see you? Have security services come to see you before the Washington Post case? And what's Cage going to do? Does Cage plan to do anything to prevent something like this with kind young individuals, kind of the individual that you...
We do that every day. We say that, fine, it's not our remit to kind of counter this, kind of terrorism, whatever else. But what we say is that Cage, what it's about empowering our communities to feel as if they can make a difference, they can own their own narrative about who they are as Muslims, not just in the UK, but around the world, and that how they can fight against injustice, oppression, against this narrative that's been established of Islamophobia in a way that still allows us to live in our communities, to engage with society. That's what we're about. We've always been about that.
But how does Cage prevent another young man coming in and exiting?
Let me just
how
bring.
are you going to answer that, really?
Just
We
let me
just wish
bring
that
Kerry in for a
nobody
moment
would do these
on that, and
Yeah,
then
sure.
we'll take Kerry.
I can say as somebody who was under those sorts of situations and under that sort of pressure, that you need an avenue where you can feel that your voice is heard. And that becomes maybe cathartic in a way, maybe a release valve, to give you somewhere to put your energies to try and make a positive change. Cage does this day in and day out with Muslim youth, with our community. Unlike some organisations that are trotted out by the government, Cage actually has a bedrock within the community. We speak with the survivors of these situations, and we actually, our events and our activities are bred from the grassroots. So I think if you look at it, day in and day out, Cage are doing work to stop these sorts of things from happening by giving people a voice and an alternative to the route that other people that this man chose.
And would you go to authorities should you, if you had any worries or any concerns about people that you were working with?
Look, you know, like anything else, I'd like to think that every single person in this room, if they thought, including yourself, if you thought a violent crime was about to take place, you'd go to the authorities and say, look, somebody's about to do something seriously crazy, you know, would you mind stepping in and stopping them? But if my son comes home from an Israel-Palestine demonstration saying things like, Israel is a terrorist state, I'm not going to shock my own child to the police, saying, well, I'm worried that he's on the pathway to radicalism or radicalisation, which is exactly what they want to do with things like the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act. We have to separate what is violent and what is criminal from ideas and beliefs and whatever else.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions. I mean, of course, the one thing that might stop you doing that is if you thought when you went to the security services, they would try and recruit them and worsen their situation rather than try and prevent them from committing an act.
Where should you go then?
Catherine Haddon from AFP. Can you tell us a bit more about how the family has reacted to this latest development and whether they plan to make any public statement?
I don't know about whether or not they plan to make any public statement. You have to go through their lawyers to find that out. But in terms of when I asked them, look, what do you think? Do you think that this is the same person? They were in utter shock. They could not believe it for the life of them. They had absolutely no idea that these two people could be the same. And even now, I can speak for myself that I'm in a state of denial. I really hope in the end that all of this actually is completely wrong. I'd much rather that we got this completely wrong. That I'm sorry, apologize to you all, I wasted your time, the two people aren't the same. I'd much rather that was the case. But they themselves, they don't, if I'm in shock, then they're definitely in shock.
One final question, Hen.
From what we've heard today, there seems to be quite a lot of emphasis on perhaps the marginalisation of Muslims, and Tel Namra and other groups have said that there has been a rise in Islamophobia following, Paris attacks or since what's happening in Syria. Do you think that as long as this so-called marginalisation of Muslims continues, that there will be more people who turn to this alternative route, and there possibly might be more so-called Jihadi Johns unless this is dealt with?
Well, yeah, I'm telling you that it's definitely not helping. For us, it's about, people, if they don't feel agency in the society that they live in, then they're never going to feel like they have a voice and that they have a contribution to make. And what our national security paradigm does is that it actually makes that point, that unless you comply, unless you become the kind of model citizen that we want you to be, then you're going to always be outside of that system. And so it prevents obsession with British values. We say, actually, we're promoting the ultimate British values, which are to do with habeas corpus, Magna Carta, due process, and all of these things. And yet, we're constantly being scrutinized as if we're outside of that system. of course, if you say to somebody that actually we think you're extreme, we think you're this, on vague terminology, then how are they ever going to feel like, well, actually, yeah, the UK society loves me, I grew up here, and you know, this is my society. Look, those of us especially who are born here in the UK, you cannot extricate our Britishness from us. Trust me, I'm just as sarcastic in my dry British wit in Pakistan as I am over here. I can't help myself. When I go to Pakistan and everybody's queuing up to go through immigration, I'm the only mug who's standing there trying to find a line going through because something inside me stops me from cutting in front of somebody else. Guess what? I realize that's my Britishness that stops me from doing that. So there's certain things you cannot simply just take out of us and say, you're no longer British, even if you take my citizenship away. So this idea about what it means to be part of this society has to change because we take that part of being British with us wherever we go. We have never lost that. We are culturally, totally, you know, for want of a better term, colonized by being British. You know, there are many things my Asian family just simply don't understand about the way I behave, okay? But that's because of that. So we need to rethink how we have this conversation about belonging, about what it means to be a part of this society, and how we engage with ideas that maybe other people might not find completely palatable and whatever else. Because I'm sure I've got views that not everybody in this room agrees with, but at least I can say that I hope that all of you can have a reasonable conversation with me about it without saying, well, we should need to take this guy's citizenship away because he doesn't agree with us on every single last point.
Okay, and on that, I'm going to close the press conference, but Asim and Kerry will be doing one-to-one interviews if you want to talk to them some more. Thank you very much.